We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth. With FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist, Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. And today we're going to be talking about how we are governed by some unserious people, in the opinions of the New York Times. And I really think they're kind of right about it. We're also going to talk about the Trump administration is rehiring federal workers after removing some federal workers. There's a loophole that's allowing the Chinese to drop some anchor babies in American territories. And kids' willpower is no match for junk food and screens, but there's a potential solution. Let's get after it. The training montage. If you happen to be watching us over at rumble.com/amradpod or YouTube at amradpod or even on Spotify, where we will drop the show after we get done recording it, probably around 1 o'clock today, you'll see that bumper scene that I drop in there. It shows the Rocky training montage, Rocky 3, Apollo and Rocky training on the beach, preparing for his upcoming rematch with Clubber Lang. It's a plot device. It's the easy button. It's so you don't, as an audience, have to watch a boxer train for 12 weeks in preparation for a fight. You just move the plot along. But there's an element of that I think people sort of just put their life on cruise control, or at least their perspective on things when certain things go their way or don't. We just kind of want to push the easy button. We want to just go through the training montage, not really hold anybody accountable because it's our guys who are in there. So when we're talking about being governed by unserious people, which we'll get to in a second, I think there's an element of the easy button. We just want to assume everything's okay. In fact, I think that might be plaguing the current occupant of the White House right now. He just thinks that he's got the best people in there. And why do I need to have all this oversight and all the hoopla and all the reporting that's gone on about some mess ups, maybe some corruption? That's just fake news. Let's just hit the easy button. Let's just watch Rocky run up those steps and be ready to go and fight. Well, that's not true. In reality, in Realville, we actually have to maintain a certain level of oversight because people who are members and principals within our government are our employees. And if you're the boss and you just allow your employees to run rampant, your company's going to kind of slide. It's not going to be nearly as effective as it could be. And they're certainly not going to achieve the mission that you've laid forward or the mandate that was set. So there was a retrospective that was put out as an opinion piece in the New York Times, and it's coming from the left because it is, after all, the New York Times, at one point a newspaper. They dislike the current occupant of the White House because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But I got to be honest, I can't quibble with too much of it. So throw this up there, and there's some name checking that goes on in this piece, which is entitled, "We Are Being Governed by Unserious People." And they talk about being unprofessional. Really, that's the overarching theme of this piece here. Kristi Noem, the recently duly departed Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, she called the shooting victims in Minnesota domestic terrorists. I got a problem with that. That's not what domestic terrorism is. They weren't people who were organizing in order to engage in an unlawful act, which was going to result in violence in order to overthrow a government on behalf of some religious or political means. No, just heated language. And then they tried to spin that and say, well, you're not allowed to bring a gun to a First Amendment protest. Yes, you can. That doesn't spell that out in our pesky, dusty document, the Bill of Rights. You talk about the First Amendment is only allowed because we have a Second Amendment. You can't engage in a First Amendment protected activity when you have a gun. Really? If you go to church and you bring a gun, that's violative of that principle? No, ridiculous. And then the reason that Kristi Noem has now been removed as a Secretary of Department of Homeland Security is because she had the giant scandal with over $200 million of your money being spent on an ad campaign to hype her and also kick back to her friends. Now, she's hardly the only principal. She's hardly the only cabinet member who's come under a lot of scrutiny. And we covered this, but just worth refreshing it. The Secretary of Labor, Lori Chavez de Remer. It's a hyphenated name. I don't know if it's because she's a Latina or if she's a girl boss, but I call her Secretary Chavez. So there's an Office of Inspector General out of the Department of Labor investigation about her personal trips. She's taking the jet, flying all over. I believe she's traveled to 48 different states in 1 year and has made it known that she doesn't want to really be involved integrally in the day-to-day operations of the Department of Labor, views herself as largely ceremonial, but has construed these trips, these business trips, as ways to just visit friends and family on behalf of the American taxpayer. Also, her husband got barred from the headquarters of the Department of Labor. He was getting handsy with the help. Some allegations weren't substantiated, but nevertheless, they said, hey, Buster, you better just not come around here anymore. Not a good look for a cabinet secretary. She's allegedly having an affair with a member of her security detail. There are now further allegations that there's been drinking on the job and taking department workers out to strip clubs. So that remains to be seen if those allegations are substantiated. And maybe there will be another secretary who is departing from the Trump administration. Pam Bondi, Attorney General. Remember, the files are on my desk. We had Bindergate, and that didn't happen. And then have all the fallout after the Epstein. And on top of that, now Pam Bondi has testified in front of congressional hearings and tried to obfuscate and avoid accountability when it came to the handling of the Epstein list revelations and the malicious compliance that's gone on with that. Well, we're not going to give you a linear layout of everything we've done, any sort of justification for opening a case, closing a case, investigative decisions that were given. We're just going to drop 3 million documents and say that's everything when we know it's actually not everything. And by the way, why are we talking about this? The Dow was at 50,000. And then the sub-cabinet agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you have Kash Patel in charge there. He's abused his jet privileges. He's jet set off to Scotland and Nashville to go do his booty calls with the girl who's his friend, Alexis Wilkins, who he's also assigned full-time SWAT detail to protect, like she's a member of the Trump family. He also went out to the Olympics and said, well, it was a business trip. I was signing a letter of intent to cooperate with my counterpart in Italy on cybersecurity matters. It just happened to coincide with the gold medal match of hockey that I said I was going to be at last July. Why are you questioning me? We're really governed by people that are quite unprofessional. Now, to the initial individual we talked about, the former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, there's been all these allegations with Kristi Noem and her chief, as he's referred to. I guess he's a special government employee or was. He was operating as a quasi chief of staff, and that's Corey Lewandowski. So National Review came out with more of an expose on what exactly Corey Lewandowski has been engaging in or was while Kristi Noem was at the helm of the Department of Homeland Security. Headline reads, how Kristi Noem's chief, Corey Lewandowski, ran her DHS tenure into the ground. So they have a pretty long relationship together, and that's apart from any sort of insinuation of a romantic relationship, which there are plentiful. Those allegations are bountiful. But for the professional relationship, which is what really this piece kind of hones in on, Corey Lewandowski was referred to as the chief. And there are some people who have come forward and said that Kristi Noem wouldn't take any meetings without him in the room, would never do a one-on-one meeting. He was a special government employee, which has some rules and stipulations attached to it. You can only be a special government employee for up to 130 days. And he was doing things to evade detection. So you have the access badge in order to get into the headquarters. You got to swipe it and put your code in order to get in. He would just kind of stand back and allow other people to go in. They'd recognize who he was, and he would just walk in with them to avoid the computer reading that he was accessing the building. He would also not make phone calls, apparently, where he would instruct somebody else to make a phone call, and then he would be in the background berating the person, made threats to put people on lie detector tests. So he tried to hold on with an iron fist, according at least to this National Review piece. And then they get into a little bit of the corruption. Kristi Noem, this $200 million advertising campaign that really brought down her tenure at Department of Homeland Security. It is alleged here in this piece and others like it that Corey Lewandowski has been doing this for the last year. He's been trying to steer private contracts to his own interests, to Buddy's interests. He would tell his subordinates to get people on the phone on behalf of the secretary, but it was never for the secretary. It was for him. He was always trying to get phone numbers of high-ranking people in private industry in order to secure contracts or liaise with them to set up his next gig. And then they go into this thing where it predates Kristi Noem's time at the Department of Homeland Security because, like I said, Lewandowski and Noem had a long-term professional relationship. Lewandowski helped Kristi Noem on her re-elect campaign to become the governor of South Dakota. He was on that campaign. And they go into this one particular instance, but because of the way that it operated, it's pretty clear that this sort of thing regularly went on. And that is Kristi Noem goes out to a fundraiser, which isn't rare in politics. If you're a big name like you're Kristi Noem, you got the sparkly eyes, you're Ice Barbie, you're on Fox News all the time, you're a draw. So smaller candidates will ask you to come out and speak on their behalf. And maybe it's somebody that you want to bring along, you want to do them a solid, they'll pay your travel expenses. It's probably good for your name ID. It's a quid pro quo, and it happens all the time. So Kristi Noem travels out to this fundraiser. I believe it was in Washington State for a couple of congressional candidates, show up there to speak for a fundraiser for those candidates, get out the vote, chip into these guys' campaign. They're going to help the movement here. And then right before the event starts, Lewandowski goes to the campaigns and says, yeah, we're going to take an early flight home. We're not going to stick around for your event. And this was after they'd announced and put out publications that Kristi Noem was going to be there. So people were going to come to these events for the small-time candidate, but really they're there to see Kristi Noem. And she was going to be a no-show. It was going to be hugely embarrassing for these small-time candidates. Might actually cost them their campaign because who's going to donate to you? Lied to me? You said I was going to get to meet the Ice Barbie and I don't? Well, it was a shakedown. Lewandowski said, well, we'll stay for a later flight if you toss $25,000 to our campaign. And just the way that this operation happened with such ease, the sources for this story talk about how this was a regular occurrence. This was a guy who was the chief, the quasi-chief of staff for the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, which gets over $300 billion a year of your money. But it's all good. We can just queue up the raw egg drinking and the one-arm push-ups because we're getting fight ready, but we really don't need to watch our actual P's and Q's. We don't need to mind the details. It's our people in charge. No, it's not so. These people like the Lewandowskis, like the Kristi Noems, like the Chavezes and the other ilk, Kash Patel, they realize that most people want to just hit the easy button, want to check out, presume everything is all right. And that's where their opportunity is to personally enrich themselves, to live like royalty, and then maybe provide for themselves into the future, secure that contract, secure that future retirement gig, maybe run for higher office. This is always an opportunity for people who lack integrity. After all, integrity is only a problem if you got it. And we just have too many people who are working in the vicinity of our government who don't have integrity. Now, let's talk about another person who is in the employ of the federal government, but kind of not. And it's a really weird story. I think it's revelatory of how the fight is still upon us. And that is an NPR piece about one Kari Lake. Headline says, a United States judge says Kari Lake broke the law in overseeing Voice of America. This is really nerdy. I don't know anybody that actually pays attention to Voice of America, which sort of begs the question, why do we fund it at all? But it also will contribute to what we're talking about today, because we're hitting the training montage and the easy button, not doing oversight when it all goes back to why the heck are we spending money on this to begin with? So the parent agency, the umbrella organization that is over Voice of America is actually called the United States Agency for Global Media. Your government's too big. There's no way that's in the pesky, dusty documents. So Donald Trump assigned Kari Lake as a senior advisor to the agency very early on in his second administration, about a month in. The acting CEO designated Kari Lake to perform almost all function as the CEO, and she was named the acting deputy CEO. It gets really weird about approving her, and she essentially called herself the acting CEO of the agency, which was a problem because allegedly there wasn't the authority to do that. I don't know why. I don't care. But Kari Lake's been at the helm, really unofficially, for a year now at Voice of America, or its parent agency. She's been operating as an acting CEO. She has fired basically everybody. And now a federal judge has stepped in and said, everything you did for the last year is null and void. Now, the training montage. Who's paying attention to all the tentacles of this story? One, we have a communist judge who is clearly engaged in the fight. Hashtag resisting, using the levers of power at his disposal, because that's what communists do. They get elected, they get appointed to positions of power, whatever they are, to punish their enemies and reward their friends. We're going to punish. We're going to throw up as many speed bumps as we possibly can. Now, this is the easy button option here. The clear route to go on a narrative, or you just want to barely pay attention and just move on to the next thing, is to say, this is just like another Judge Boasberg. We just need to impeach this judge. It's never going to happen. Now, the reality that it isn't going to happen is a problem that's worth digging into, because it goes back to a feckless United States Congress, which is led by the Republicans. And they're not communists. I mean, they're kind of on the same road to it, but they don't have the pedal pushed all the way to the metal. They're just more of a cruise control party. They get elected to be something, not to do something. They're less interested in punishing their enemies and rewarding their friends, unless, of course, they're Kash Patel, who likes to reward himself all the time. But why are they funding this to begin with? And that, to me, is the ultimate thing you go back to. All the machinations aside, and did Kari Lake maybe do some self-aggrandizing and declare herself the acting CEO because she's worried about her image and she wants to run for office again after having failed to win the governorship in Arizona and then a Senate spot in Arizona? Maybe she's trying to do a Kristi Noem sort of thing, do an okay job where I'm at here and then pop my image up and maybe aspire to other things. Maybe. I don't know Kari Lake at all. I've seen her once. And for a time, I know that her book was out and it was not doing well. I'll have to look and see actually how she did. I know she made a pretty penny on the advance, like $100,000 for writing a book. But why is this position necessary at all? Well, it's the law, Steve. Congress passed a budget. Yeah. Who runs Congress? Why is there a Voice of America? What is the agency again called? The U.S. Agency for Global Media? Why are we in that business? Why are we spending that money? It's a pretty easy line item to just remove if we had elected officials who are actually interested in doing their job. But if you're interested in a training montage, blame the judge, and then get outraged, and then realize that Voice of America has very little to do with your life, and then accept how we now are going to be rehiring with back pay. How many workers did she remove? 1,000 journalists and staffers who were removed over the last year. They're getting brought back with full back pay and bennies. The battle is upon us right now. The effort at all, if you took the Donald Trump campaign and the early days, the administration seriously, particularly on the Department of Government Efficiency and its efforts to scale back on the federal behemoth that we have right now, that battle is still going on. I know Elon Musk has departed from the administration. Maybe he did the best he could and realized that it just was never going to happen. The cuts have certainly not happened. But everybody said, oh, Doge is awesome. I'm going to follow them on Twitter and then assume everything is okay. Not so. It's in the details, in the nitty gritty. The battle is continuing. And even on that, I've got a piece over from Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, outside of Voice of America, still fighting the battle of turning over the workforce at the federal government, and not in a way that I think is totally awesome. I mean, I guess it's in a better trajectory, but let's get to the details. Headline says, after slashing federal jobs, Trump administration ramps up hiring. I thought we were going to shrink government, but apparently not so. Now, the Washington Post is very concerned because I guess the Trump administration is changing some of the regulations of employment so that it's easier to fire people, which I like. I think that's probably an objective thing that I could get on board for. Objectively good. But from this article, the Trump administration fired, laid off, or accepted buyouts from nearly 400,000 federal employees. And in the same time, they've hired back 125,000 employees. So it's still a net decrease in employees, but I would have preferred to just leave 400,000 people off the rolls. I don't know why we had to hire them back. And again, Washington Post wants to beef up the federal government because it's run by communists and they're very interested in growing the size of government. So they point to some examples, and on par with Voice of America, or the U.S. Agency for Global Media, whatever the heck it was called. Yeah, I nailed that. U.S. Agency for Global Media. Why the heck are we funding it? Some of the examples they list off. The first one is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. You know, it's really important when they use the word security twice. That's a sub-agency of Department of Homeland Security that was formed during the first Trump administration, CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They say, oh, we're defending the homeland against threats to our infrastructure. And then they said that cognitive infrastructure was something within their purview, the mission creep that comes in and say, we have oversight of cognitive infrastructure. That's a fancy way of saying what you think. The gray matter between your ears falls within our area of responsibility, our jurisdiction. So we need to control the inputs. So therefore, the outputs out of your mouth are something that comports with what we want. And we don't want to have any of that dis, or malinformation. So CISA, they lost 40% of the workforce last year. Okay. 60% to go, bro. All of it's got to go. Not in the pesky, dusty document. I think that free thought is something that was rather important to the founding fathers. But, what do I know? I'm hardly a government expert like they have over at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where job applications are down 50%. Okay, well, I want to take care of our veterans, but the legion stories about the corruption that's gone on in the Veterans Affairs, I'm not really overly concerned about what's going on there. And the IRS only onboarded 2% of the employees that they wanted to add. They wanted to add 2,200 people to the IRS. I thought we were getting rid of the IRS and we're just going to use tariffs. But they only got 50 people onboarded. So the hiring process is going slow. They wanted to add 2,200, at least that was spelled out. Washington Post, very, very sad about the IRS. But again, the battle here is going on. We're in the thick of it. We're mired in the mud on the Battle of the Marne, to throw out a World War I reference here. It's slogging along, not to the speed we wanted. And we can hardly just sit back and watch Rocky and Apollo race across the beach and presume that everything is going to be just fine. Now, the IRS doesn't have enough people, so they're going to have to add people, I guess, particularly now as we're heading into the tax season. Everybody's getting ready to have their money officially stolen, I mean taxed, by the federal government so that they can stand up a U.S. agency for global media for you, right? But how are they going to manage? We have tried to slash, but not really. And we continue to spend more money than we did before. It's now the Republican conservative position that the Joe Biden spending levels that we saw happening 2021, that's the starting point that they want to go to. That's considered to be conservative now. That's how much we've shifted leftward politically in this country. So eventually you just run out of money. You have to steal it from your people. I mean, tax it, or inflate it by printing more money, borrow sums of money that their kids and grandkids, the citizenry, will eventually have to pay back with interest. So now we've come out with a solution from Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna, who Ro Khanna did pretty good with the Epstein stuff, but he's a communist from California. So we have a billionaire tax officially being proposed in Congress, both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The myth of the billionaire wealth tax. So this bill that's been proposed is a 5% annual wealth tax on anyone who is worth more than $1 billion. And because they can't do math, Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders say that this is going to raise over $4 trillion in 10 years. So $400 billion a year. That's economic literacy. I mean, Elon Musk, I think he's worth just under $700 billion. So that would be $35 billion that he'd have to pay over today or this year to the federal government if you had this sort of bill get passed into law. But that's not the way that this works. And it sounds good. I mean, if you're coming from the communist left, you say, just tax those billionaires. They're Scrooge McDuck. They have giant towers that they can go inside and swim in filled with gold coins. That's actually what they have. That's their net worth. No. Elon Musk has business interests in multiple companies that are valued at a certain level, and he's got a certain level of ownership in them. In order to actually realize the gains that he has in those companies, in order to liquidate it, he'd actually have to sell his ownership interests in SpaceX or Tesla or the Boring Company, any of these other interests. Or maybe the guy owns some art or some real estate. If you own a $25 million house, your net worth includes $25 million of value, but that's not liquid. You can't go to the grocery store and say, hey, I got a $25 million house. Why don't you just deduct that from the value of my house when I buy a steak here at Walmart? That's not the way that works. So in order to actually pay that tax, which he'd have to do every single year, mind you, he would have to liquidate his holdings in a company, which if he did, would cause the stock prices to go down, not just for him, but for everybody who is invested in Tesla. Or he'd have to sell the $25 million property. And that presupposes that somebody out there is going to buy the property. Somebody has the cash to buy it, or realizes that, hey, old Elon there, he's got to pay that tax bill. He's desperate. He needs the cash. 25 million for that property. I'll give you 10 million for it. Well, now his net worth has gone down, and now you're causing the property values to go down. This is the sort of economic literacy that you get from the communists and increasingly from the Republicans in elected positions who don't actually realize the way things go. And if they do realize it, they're just depending on you to not pay attention. Say, you know what? Soak the rich. That billionaire doesn't affect me. Really, he's worth 700 billion. So what? Let's just deduct 30 billion out of that. He'll do just fine. That's generational upon generational wealth. I'm not worried about it. Well, you should be, because if something like that happens, you're going to see an exodus of the wealthy from the country, or you'll just see them have to comply with it. And that will hurt your bottom line, your net worth, when your Tesla stock drops through the floor. Now I want to go to something that's kind of like out of left field, but I saw it and it reminded me of a previous episode of the American Radicals podcast. So this pertains to anchor babies coming from China, and as a throwback to, I believe, an episode I did interviewing George Hill. It was threat review prioritization. I will depend on Rose Lopez in the chat on both YouTube and Rumble at AmRadPod to find it. It's in like the 250s, Rose, if memory serves. Threat review prioritization. We talked about China and the Marianas Islands. So from Headline News, headlineusa.com. Obama loophole helping Chinese nationals give birth to U.S. babies. Now, in 2009, President Obama created a categorical parole program. Wow, that's very government esque of him. It enabled Chinese nationals to visit the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, CNMI, which is an American territory. People who live there are technically citizens of the United States, but the Chinese could visit the Mariana Islands without a tourist visa or vetting and then drop a baby, have an anchor baby. Now, I know that the Trump administration is fighting currently about uh, birthright citizenship, and that's going to have to be adjudicated all the way through the court systems. But for the time being, a diabolical opponent like the Chinese Communist Party can now still, decade and a half later, send their citizens to the Mariana Islands without any vetting at all, just fly in, pop out a baby, and that individual is a citizen of the United States, which opens up a host of avenues for them to use for their counterintelligence purposes. That's going on currently. What's going on to rectify that problem? If Obama did it, why couldn't it be undone like now, immediately? Particularly when you have Donald Trump as the president and he's made no secret of the fact that he doesn't like China very much. Okay, address this one. This is something that's pretty easy, I think. But if you're just on the easy button on the training montage, it's in the details. You're not paying too much attention to it. And I alluded to the conversation that I had with George Hill a couple months back on threat review prioritization, because when I saw the Northern Mariana Islands on this thing, I thought, yeah, I remember talking about that. And there's a lot of corruption that goes on in the Mariana Islands. So much so that the former governor, I guess, it's like the president, came into office and said, hey, my prior administration, my predecessor, they took $1.6 billion from the US government. We only have 50,000 people who live here, by the way. And we can't account for that money. It's just disappeared into a bottomless pit here. Could you investigate that for us? FBI Director Kash Patel. Oh, one of those very unprofessional people that were alluded to very early on here in today's program. And Kash Patel has some interests with the Chinese government. He's certainly got some business interests that he didn't really divest himself. That was pointed out when he was being confirmed by the United States Senate, which run by Republicans, the type of people who get elected to be something, not necessarily do something, certainly not oversight of the Kash Patels of the world. And the FBI responded back under the leadership of Kash Patel to the governor of the Mariana Islands. We're closing this investigation. We're not going to look into that. So on top of birthright citizenship being something that we should correct, how about Pam Bondi tells Kash Patel reopen that investigation? $1.6 billion of the American people's money went missing. You're going to have to find out what happened there. But we could just sit back, not worry about it, guys. Come on. We got our people there. We got Rocky just trudging through the Russian forest, chopping down wood. He'll be ready. No problem at all. Now, let's pivot away from government and the gangsters and the corruption. And I want to talk about some willpower issues, because nobody really wants to put in the work. That's why we're doing the training montages. And I saw this and I just thought it was something that was interesting, and I wanted to share it with the AmRad Pod audience. It comes from NPR, amazingly enough. And the headline reads, "Kids' willpower is no match for fast food and screens. Try this instead." Now, when I saw this headline, I thought, these communists just want my kids to not work hard. I'm that guy. I make my kids go outside. I'm that guy. I make my kids work out actually at a gym, because I say, if you want to be good at football, you're going to actually have to work out. And then I drop my whole, you're going to go to the dark place. Sometimes you do things that you don't want to do, so you get stronger tomorrow. And I thought, these damn communists at NPR are going to argue that you don't want to tax your kids. Actually, the way this checks out makes a lot of sense. So again, the piece is called "Kids' Willpower is No Match for Fast Food and Screens. Try this instead." Now, for decades, psychologists and parents have been telling parents like yours truly, you need to train your kids to have willpower, with the ability to resist temptation. So say, hey, look, I'm going to put this marshmallow in front of you. Don't have it. Don't have it. Don't have it. Now, recent studies have revealed that backfires. It actually makes the kids want the marshmallow, want the tablet, or whatever the vice is that makes them want it more. And part of me is like, well, yeah, obviously they want the marshmallow because it tastes awesome. But actually, willpower isn't what needs to be tested. It's the ability to avoid temptation in the first place. So the more successful people didn't have better willpower. They didn't exercise that muscle to say no to the marshmallow or the donut or the Xbox. Instead, the successful people set their lives up so that they didn't actually have to use willpower at all. And they didn't have the Xbox in their house. They didn't buy marshmallows at the grocery store. The temptation was removed entirely, which I think makes a lot of sense, which connects back to the people we have in government, the Kristi Noems, the Lori Chavez de Remers. We haven't removed those temptations. Why does the FBI director have a private jet? I mean, he's a piece of trash who's abused his authority. He abused his authority to go into a locker room with a bunch of naked dudes. Where is #MeToo, by the way? What if he'd done the same thing to the female hockey team? You know they'd be up in arms then. What's the difference? What is gender, by the way, for their communist leftists? The one or two who happen to hate watch the program. Maybe give us a thumbs up today on that one. But maybe we should remove the temptation entirely. Maybe that would go a lot better for us, right? Maybe we could take away the jet, disallow the ability to just travel around a jet set, take away the bank access so that, that government charge card. No, we're not going to do that for you. We're not going to rely on the training montage anymore. We're going to have a lot more scrutiny of people. The special government employee, you have to badge in every single time. Oh, your 130 days elapsed? Too bad. You got to go. Corey Lewandowski can't steer government contracts to himself. It's going to require a lot more oversight, a lot more paying attention from the American people, and less presupposing that because your guys and gals are there, everything is awesome. But again, it's personal accountability, which we lack, and I get it, which will take us to our last piece today. And I just wanted to throw this out there because it's fun and pretty funny. This is from NJ.com. You talk about some ingenuity and some entrepreneurial skills and combining people's lack of willpower with further lack of willpower. Headline: Girl Scout troop sets up shop at weed dispensary. Cookies are in high demand. Man, if there's anything about Adam Smith, wealth of nations and moral sentiments, this proves it. If there's a gap in the market, it will be filled. So a South Jersey-based Girl Scout troop recently teamed up with the Daylight Dispensary in Mount Laurel to sell their beloved cookies at the cannabis shop this cookie season. And shocker, they're killing it, guys. The munchies combined with that sweet, sweet taste of those Thin Mint cookies. Hopefully they freeze the Thin Mints because that's the only way to eat Thin Mints. You put them in the freezer and then they're even better. All right, so we've reached the end of the American Radicals podcast for the day, guys. Reminder, if you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe, do all those things, the comments. Make sure you head on over again to Spotify if you haven't already. One time, that's my ass. That's the project. One time this week, just turn on the show in the background. Turn the volume down. You don't even have to watch it. It would help us grow there. If you haven't already followed us there, we really appreciate it. And in keeping with the theme of the day, for the training montage. You know, one guy who didn't just watch a training montage, the guy who just recently set the world record for the half marathon. Let's give this a play.
Já está com 57 minutos, recorde do mundo é 57:30, na viragem à esquerda, quase a entrar na zona do tapete azul.
O recorde do mundo caiu por 10 segundos, vou aqui mais 10 segundos.
Temos festa.
Impressionante.
Recorde
este homem é do outro mundo.
Do mundo da meia maratona para Jacob Kiplimo.
For those listening, that guy ran a half marathon in 57 minutes. That's insane. If you get on a treadmill today, if you think, oh, look, I ate too many Thin Mint cookies outside the weed dispensary, it's time to just stop thinking about the training montage and maybe put in some sweat equity, go to that dark place. If you jacked the speed on the treadmill up to like 13.2, 13.3 and ran on it for an hour, that would be what that guy just did. And didn't collapse, was jumping into the arms and pumping his fist the whole way. Some people, man, are good, and some people are good. All right. We will plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime Eastern, as always. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.